Hi there, I'm Clyde. If this is your first time stumbling into one of my exceptionally boring adventures, well, welcome. I hope you're somewhere cozy, maybe snuggled under a blanket or letting your eyes grow heavy as you listen. You've found my little corner of time. And I do mean time, because I'm a bit of a traveler. Not the exciting kind with missions or danger. Oh no, I just sort of drift. And wherever I land, I try to enjoy the most mundane parts of the day. If you like falling asleep to slow stories about absolutely nothing of consequence, you might want to check out my playlist. It's full of all my yawn-worthy wanderings. And before you forget, go ahead and like and subscribe now, so you don't miss any of the future journeys. I wouldn't want you to drift off before doing that. And hey, if you really enjoy these tales and feel like supporting the channel, you can even become a channel member. It helps keep the time machine, well, humming along. And if you do, I'll make you your very own sleepy story. Something custom, just for you. Tonight, I've landed somewhere especially damp. There's a bit of a drizzle. Well, more than a bit. I'm standing just outside the Taj Mahal, watching the sky weep onto the pale stone walkways. I didn't bring an umbrella, of course. I almost never do. I suppose I should have expected the rain, but it's the perfect kind of day to do absolutely nothing at all. So I think I'll just find a dryish spot to lean, watch the clouds dance, and let my thoughts wander like the puddles at my feet. Let's begin. The first thing I noticed, aside from the unmistakable drip, drip, drip of rain landing on the bridge of my nose, was the smell. Wet stone. Petrichor, they call it. The scent that rises up from thirsty earth the moment it meets rain again. Here, it mingled with something faintly floral, perhaps from the neat little hedges lining the gardens, or the breeze carrying ghost notes of distant jasmine. The Taj Mahal loomed quietly before me. Majestic, sure. But today it didn't seem grand. Not in the overwhelming postcard sort of way. It felt smaller somehow, more personal. Like it had curled in on itself to stay dry and was now simply keeping me company. A pale friend with domes for a hat and windows like tired eyes. I shifted my weight from one foot to the other, my boots squelching faintly against the slick red sandstone path. I'd been standing still so long that a puddle had started forming around my left shoe. I didn't mind. My toes were already damp from the moment I arrived, and honestly, it was kind of nice. There's something grounding about wet socks. They remind you of where you are, what you've done, what you forgot to bring. I reached into the inside pocket of my cloak, brushing past a folded scrap of paper and a half-melted caramel, and found what I was looking for, the smooth stone. My stone, just big enough to fill the center of my palm. Cool and silent now, but I knew that wouldn't last. It always hummed before a new trip. It always gave me a soft glow. But for now, it was still, waiting. I ran my thumb along its surface absent-mindedly, tracing the faint curve as my eyes settled on a small stream of water winding down the marble steps ahead. It split and pooled in tiny divots, then merged again like two lazy travelers deciding to share a path. The flow was hypnotic. I stood and watched it for what felt like a full afternoon, though I suppose it couldn't have been more than a few minutes, or an hour, or... well, time is odd when you don't measure it with plans. A group of visitors shuffled by in the distance, their bright umbrellas bobbing like jellyfish against the gray. One child was particularly thrilled with the puddles, hopping from one to another with wild glee, the splash echoing like applause in the quiet air. I gave him a small wave. He didn't see me. That was fine. I found a nearby bench under a struggling awning and settled in. The wood was a bit warped, and one corner dipped at an angle that made my left hip sit higher than my right, but I adjusted. I've sat in worse places. once on a barrel of pickled fish during the 18th century. I don't recommend it. As I sat, I reached into my satchel and retrieved a wrinkled, damp paper bag. Inside were 2 leftover biscuits from a bakery I'd visited 3 or 4 time hops ago. A little dry, a little crumbly. Perfect. I bit into one and let the flavor dissolve into the quiet moment. Somewhere, a bird let out a squawk of protest, either at the rain or at life in general. I sympathized. I glanced up again at the Taj Mahal. Its reflection shimmered in the puddles, slightly warped and dancing with every fresh drop from the sky. I could almost imagine it swaying to some slow, rainy rhythm, like a drowsy elephant rocking in place. I let out a sigh and leaned back, adjusting the collar of my cloak to keep the drips from sliding down my neck. Maybe I'd nap, or maybe I'd just sit here a while longer, watch the water paint new shapes, see how long it took for the storm to run out of steam. Either way, I wasn't in a hurry. Nothing urgent ever happened when I stayed still long enough. The biscuit was a bit crumblier than I remembered, or maybe it was just wetter. Still, I munched on it contentedly, watching as rain plinked steadily into the shallow canal that mirrored the Taj Mahal. The water was clear and cool, its surface rippling with every droplet like it was softly applauding the weather for being so persistent. Beside me, on the bench's far corner, lay a small tin spoon. It had likely been forgotten by some previous guest, or maybe discarded by someone with hands too full of umbrellas and children to bother with a bit of dull cutlery. I picked it up gently and turned it over in my palm. It was slightly bent, just at the neck where the bowl met the handle. Not dramatically so, but enough to make it wobble if you tried to lay it flat. I admired the way it caught the faint gray light and reflected a tiny, funhouse version of the Taj Mahal behind me. For a while, I did nothing but rotate it slowly, watching the warped reflection shift and stretch. I thought for a moment of spoons I'd known. There had been a golden one in a French court, I think. Very ornate, far too fancy for my tastes. And once, in a dusty farmhouse on the American prairie, I'd stirred a pot of beans with a wooden ladle so big it could double as a canoe paddle. That one had cracked midway through dinner, and we all had to drink soup from cups instead. The family didn't seem to mind. I rather enjoyed it, actually. But this spoon, this forgotten bent spoon, felt like the sort of thing someone might remember fondly years from now without knowing why. Maybe they'd say, "Remember that trip to the Taj Mahal?" The rain? And didn't you lose a spoon? And they'd laugh, the way people do when their memories tangle in small and lovely ways. I set the spoon gently down beside me again. I figured if it had waited this long for someone to claim it, it could wait a little longer. The rain had shifted from a steady pour to more of a misting drizzle, the kind that doesn't exactly fall but seems to float sideways and stick to your eyelashes. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, then pulled my hood a little closer around my face. There was a goosebumpy chill in the air now. Not cold exactly, just the kind of temperature that encourages you to fold your arms and make a little tent of your own body. That's when I noticed the dog. It wasn't doing anything particularly remarkable, just standing at the edge of a hedge, nose to the ground, sniffing slowly and methodically like it had forgotten what it was looking for. Its fur was damp and a bit patchy. One ear flopped down while the other stuck up like a satellite dish scanning the drizzle. It looked over at me, blinked once and went back to sniffing. A fellow traveler, I thought, a wanderer of garden paths and puddles. I watched it for several minutes before it disappeared behind a row of bushes shaped like bells. Or maybe they were tulips. I never really learned my topiary terminology. Off in the distance, the echo of soft voices reached my ears. Tourists speaking gently in a language I didn't recognize, but whose rhythm was soothing. It reminded me of the way wind sounds in tall grass. Not sharp, not whispering, just meandering. I leaned further back on the bench, stretching out my legs until my heels rested in the small runoff of rain along the stone path. My boots made a slight thunk against the edge of the drainage groove. I didn't move them. It was oddly satisfying to feel the stream glide past the soles, carrying bits of leaf and blossom petal like tiny boats on a voyage to nowhere. The rain picked up slightly again, not heavy, just enough to drum a new pattern on the wooden awning above. I tilted my head to listen. It was a different sound than earlier, less scattered, more rhythmic, like a hesitant drummer tapping their fingers while thinking about something else entirely. I closed my eyes for a moment, just for a moment. I must have dozed for a while, not fully asleep, just that drowsy in-between where your mind drifts like a leaf caught in a gutter stream. One moment, you're staring at the way the rain curls around a bench leg. The next, you're thinking about how raisins used to taste better in the 1920s. Or maybe that was just the hat I wore back then that made them feel more flavorful. When I sat up again, the drizzle had picked up once more, and the spoon was gone. I blinked at the space beside me where I'd left it, damp wood now bare except for a faint smudge of its outline. I didn't see anyone take it, didn't hear footsteps. I suppose it could have clattered to the ground and been carried off by the same curious dog from before. Or perhaps the wind needed it for something. Spoons make excellent wind chimes in a pinch. The idea made me smile. I stood slowly, stretching one arm and then the other. My spine gave a gentle crack, a reminder that even time travelers aren't immune to the indignities of long sitting. Across the way, a gardener in a bright orange tunic was crouched beside a puddle, poking it with a stick. Maybe he was checking the drainage, or maybe he dropped something. Or maybe, like me, he just liked seeing how water swirls when you prod it. I wandered in no particular direction, following the curved edge of the canal like it was a path on a board game. The Taj Mahal loomed quietly on my left, unchanged, yet somehow softer in the haze. The rain made it feel closer, like a secret whispered in confidence. Eventually, I found a small stone step where the pathway narrowed. There, I crouched and dipped my fingers into the water. It was cold, but not unfriendly, the kind of chill that makes you pay attention to your fingertips. A voice drifted by, low and steady. Not aimed at me, just the wind carrying someone else's conversation around a corner. I couldn't make out the words, but I liked the tone. Calm, deliberate. I imagined an elderly man telling a younger one about the way the clouds used to behave when he was a boy, or perhaps two friends arguing gently about whether to get chai now, or wait until the rain passed. Chai sounded nice. I checked my satchel. No thermos, of course. No money either, unless someone here took Roman denarii, which I very much doubted. Still, the idea of tea settled warmly into my thoughts. If I couldn't drink it, maybe I could imagine it clearly enough to trick my brain. I closed my eyes and pictured steam curling from a clay cup, the scent of cardamom and ginger lifting with it. The thought made me sigh happily. Almost warm, that illusion. Somewhere behind me, a bird chirped once, then again, before trailing off like it had lost interest in its own song. The gardener had moved on. The puddle, still there, looked slightly shallower than before. Progress. I took another slow lap around the edge of the reflecting pool, one hand in my pocket, fingers brushing the smooth stone. It still didn't glow. Still didn't hum. Good. I wasn't ready to leave yet. A drip of water slid from my hairline down to my nose, and I let it hang there for a bit before wiping it away. I was beginning to enjoy myself in the way only rainy days allow, where time forgets to tick and nobody expects anything of you. The bench, the spoon, the gardener, the imagined tea, all part of a long, lazy loop I was more than happy to wander. It wasn't until I was making my way back around the reflecting pool that I noticed him. A man standing just beyond the gardens, his umbrella tilted ever so slightly to one side, as though it, too, was bored with being upright. He wore a light-colored tunic, maybe cream or pale yellow, and stood perfectly still, like someone listening for a sound they weren't sure they'd actually heard. We didn't speak. He didn't even look directly at me. Not at first, just stood there, umbrella in hand, eyes fixed on a distant spot in the grey. A monument beyond the monument, perhaps. Or nothing at all. I respected that. I too have stared at nothing and thought it important. I paused a few paces away, not wanting to disturb whatever silence he'd built around himself. Still, something about his presence made me want to share the moment. So I leaned against a stone railing and watched the same direction he was watching, even though I hadn't a clue what we were pretending to see. The rain had calmed again, more of a steady whisper now, the kind that made the air seem thick with secrets. The kind that sticks to your thoughts and makes you forget what you were doing just moments before. Eventually, the man glanced at me. Not startled, not annoyed, just acknowledging. He gave a small nod, the kind you offer someone who understands how to leave a moment untouched. Then, after another breath or two, he turned and walked away. No words, no grand farewell. Just footsteps against wet stone and the soft patter of droplets falling from his umbrella's edge. I watched him disappear around a curve in the garden path, and somehow the air felt even quieter after he was gone. I don't often feel lonely during these little detours through time. There's always something to watch. A leaf turning, a puddle deepening, a dog wandering off in pursuit of who knows what. But in that quiet after the umbrella man left, I felt it. Just a whisper of it, a reminder that even the quietest places can feel quieter when someone exits. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Then I reached for the stone again, the smooth palm-sized one tucked in my pocket. Still cool, still silent. A few school children passed me not long after, chattering excitedly and pointing at the fountains, the birds, the way the water slid along the smooth surfaces of the railings. One of them accidentally bumped my knee as he passed and offered a quick, apologetic look before running on ahead. I gave him a smile in return. And just like that, the silence was gone. Not gone entirely, of course, but softened, shared. I turned back toward the Taj Mahal and tilted my head. It looked exactly the same as before, and somehow entirely new. As the rain continued its gentle conversation with the earth, I found myself wandering again, this time following the faint aroma of something warm and sweet carried by the wind. Chai, surely. I was certain of it now. The scent wound its way through the mist like a thread meant just for me, curling around tree trunks and brushing past my ears until I had no choice but to follow. I turned a corner near a low stone wall where tourists usually posed for photographs on clearer days, and there it was. Or rather, there it should have been. A tiny chai stand. I could see it perfectly in my mind. A wooden cart with steam rising from a battered kettle, stacked clay cups waiting to be filled, a wrinkled man with a red scarf carefully stirring sugar with the kind of attention usually reserved for treasure maps. It was all there, except that it wasn't. The spot was empty, just wet stone and a small puddle with a single yellow leaf bobbing like a raft. I tilted my head, squinted, walked closer. No cart, no kettle, no scarfed man. The scent, though, it lingered. I stood still for a while, letting the wind wrap around me. I closed my eyes and imagined the warmth of the cup in my hands. The spicy notes, the grainy sweetness, the burn on the tip of my tongue from the first too eager sip. And just like that, I wasn't cold anymore. It's funny how the mind works. Give it a smell, a texture, a memory of steam, and it builds you a whole moment. I leaned against the stone wall, pretending to hold the invisible cup in both hands, even brought it to my lips, though there was nothing there. I must have looked a bit odd to anyone passing by, but no one seemed to notice. Or if they did, they let me be strange in peace. A pair of monkeys darted across the path in front of me, one holding something suspiciously shaped like a sandwich. The other gave chase, both of them slipping slightly on the rain-slick walkway, their little feet pattering like drummers late to rehearsal. I watched them disappear into a hedge, their laughter, or at least that's how it sounded, echoing briefly before fading into the drizzle. The chai scent was fading too now, pulled away by the breeze or swallowed by the damp. I sighed and gave the invisible cup one last swirl before setting it down on the wall beside me. It didn't make a sound, of course, but in my head it landed with the gentle clink of clay on stone. I smiled, and then, just to amuse myself, I whispered, "Best cup I never had." I eventually wandered back toward the main fountain, the long one, the one that stretches out like a thin mirror pointed at the sky. The rain had slowed again, settling into a soft mist that made everything shimmer. The surface of the water was mostly still now, save for the occasional ripple when a rogue drop made contact, disturbing its temporary peace. I crouched near the edge, elbows on my knees, watching the tiny fountains at regular intervals spit their delicate arcs into the air, the water catching what little light filtered through the clouds. It was oddly comforting, like the fountains weren't really trying to impress anyone, just keeping themselves busy. I held out my hand and let a single raindrop land on my palm. It took its time, but when it did, I said, "Hello." I didn't expect a reply, not in words, but I like to think raindrops listen better than most people. They don't interrupt, they don't rush you, they don't tell stories to top yours. They just arrive, quiet and complete. So I talked to it. I told it about the spoon I'd found, and the tea I didn't drink. I mentioned the gardener and the dog and the man with the umbrella who may or may not have been thinking about clouds shaped like elephants. I told it about my rock, the smooth, glowing one I keep in my pocket. I said I wasn't ready for it to hum just yet. I wasn't done here. Not quite. The raindrop, of course, had already vanished into my skin or slipped off my hand or rejoined the puddle below. But another one arrived soon after, and I kept talking. Sometimes I wonder if, in all my travels, I've been looking for something, a destination, a moment, a sign. But then I end up someplace like this, caught in the rain outside one of the most breathtaking monuments ever built. And I realize I'm not searching for a place exactly. I'm searching for stillness, and maybe also warm socks, but mostly stillness. The fountains burbled gently behind me. A child somewhere laughed, the kind of laugh that's not about anything specific, just joy tumbling out because it has nowhere else to go. I smiled and let a few more raindrops fall on my face, blinking slowly as they rolled toward my chin. I didn't wipe them away. If I sat there long enough, I might just melt into the moment entirely. But of course, I wouldn't. Not yet. Not quite. A hush by the time I stood up again. It was more like a fine mist now. The kind that doesn't really fall, just lingers in the air like a secret nobody wants to say aloud. I brushed the damp from my knees, not that it mattered. Everything I wore had already soaked through hours ago, or maybe minutes. I don't always keep track. The sky was beginning to lighten in patches. Not sunshine exactly, but hints of brightness breaking through the thick gray, turning parts of the marble walls pale gold instead of cold white. The Taj Mahal shimmered just a little more now, as if proud of having endured the storm. I gave it a nod. It had done well. As I turned back toward the path, I felt it. A quiet warmth pressing into the side of my leg. The stone. still nestled in my pocket, just where I'd left it, but no longer still. It had begun to hum, softly, a low, familiar vibration like the purring of a very tired cat. And it was glowing faintly now, just enough that I could see the edges lit up through the fold of my cloak. It always did that when it was time. Time to move on. I stood still for a while longer, watching the way the puddles caught the sky's tentative colors, how the reflections of distant trees rippled even though there was no breeze. A small bird landed a few feet away, shook itself once, and then hopped toward a glistening snack I couldn't quite identify. I looked down at the stone again. The thing about being a time traveler, or a time wanderer, really, is that you don't often get goodbyes. You just sort of drift in and eventually drift out. And the places don't miss you, not really. But sometimes you miss them. I reached into my pocket and curled my fingers around the stone. Its warmth pulsed gently. Not urgent, just expectant. "I know," I whispered. Almost. I looked back one last time at the domes and spires and puddles, the stillness, the fading drizzle. Then I took a breath so deep it reached the soles of my feet and let it out in a slow, satisfied sigh. The stone brightened in my hand, hummed again, just once, and the world began to soften. Colors first, then edges, then everything. I didn't fight it. I never do. It's not like falling. More like remembering something just before waking up. There's a particular kind of shuffle people make when their shoes are soaked. Not a walk, not quite a trudge. More like a resigned glide, as if they've accepted that the bottoms of their feet are now just permanent sponges. I heard that sound long before I saw the man. A soft shh, dragging across the stone walkway. He came into view slowly, rounding the curved path with a map held high above his head like a makeshift umbrella. It was a proper paper map, too. The folded kind that tourists used before everything lived in rectangles in their pockets. It flapped slightly in the breeze, soggy at the corners and beginning to tear right down the fold. He held it with both hands, and a look of desperate optimism, as though believing it could still serve both as navigational aid and rain shelter. I admired the commitment. He didn't seem to notice me at first, just kept scanning the misty grounds, glancing down at the map now and then with the intensity of someone trying to decipher ancient runes. Eventually, he looked up and gave me a sheepish grin. "Do you know which side is the front?" I blinked. "Of the Taj Mahal?" He nodded, then lifted the map a bit higher as if that would help it explain itself. "Well," I said, turning slightly and pointing through the thinning rain, "you're standing near the western gate, I think. So technically that would be—" I paused, watching as a gust of wind caught one edge of the map and folded it over his fingers. He frowned. "I thought I was near the north garden, but the river's supposed to be behind it, right?" I shrugged. "Depends which way you're facing, or which century you're in." He laughed, not the kind of laugh that means someone got the joke, but the kind you let out when you're too wet to argue with strangers. "I think I'm just going to wander," he said. "That's usually the best plan." He gave me a friendly nod and wandered off without folding the map, letting it drag behind him like the train of a soggy paper wedding dress. I watched it trail across the stones, slowly coming apart at the folds, until he rounded another bend and disappeared into the hedges. After the man with the map drifted away, or perhaps dissolved into the fog entirely, I wandered back toward the long, reflecting pool. The rain was barely there now, more suggestion than substance. Just a whisper that made the air feel heavier, like time itself was pressing gently on my shoulders. I knelt again near the edge of the water. The pool was smooth, almost unnaturally so, like a single sheet of glass laid carefully between the walkways. The reflection of the Taj Mahal stared back at me, upside down, trembling slightly. Every now and then, a drop from a nearby tree would land on the surface and ripple outward, distorting the dome into soft waves. I waved at my reflection. It waved back. Half a second late, like it wasn't quite sure what I wanted. I reached into the water with a single finger and traced a circle, just to see what it would do. The ripples spread slowly, like a clock unwinding. Then I drew a lazy spiral and watched the monument swirl into a seashell. It occurred to me then that I was probably the only person in the history of the Taj Mahal who had spent more time watching its reflection than the actual structure. I wasn't sure if that made me a poet or just someone with nothing better to do. Probably both. I sat down fully then, cross-legged on the damp stone, boots dripping into a nearby crack in the path. I leaned forward slightly, elbows on my knees, chin in my hands, and just stared. I think I saw a fish. Not a big one, just a flash of silver darting beneath the surface near the edge. I blinked. Maybe it was just a leaf caught under the water, or a trick of the light. But I liked the idea of a fish, a secret little swimmer beneath this great pool of silence, weaving past tourist footprints and forgotten coins. And yes, there were coins. As I looked closer, I saw them, dozens of them, scattered like a lazy constellation across the bottom of the shallow water. Some were recent, shiny, eager. Others were green at the edges, crusted with thyme and algae. Wishes, I suppose. Little metallic promises thrown in by people hoping for love or success, or simply to remember this place longer than their camera roll would allow. I didn't throw one in, not yet. I didn't want to make a wish until I figured out what I wanted. So instead, I leaned back and watched the clouds move slowly across the reflected sky. One in particular looked like a spoon. Another, I swear, was shaped like a sleeping dog. I smiled. Somewhere, a bell rang once. Faint, distant. Maybe from a bicycle. Or maybe time just wanted me to know it was still ticking. I ignored it. Just past the reflecting pool, near the end of a hedged corridor that probably led to a garden, I spotted a stone bench. Slightly crooked, the way benches get after decades of quiet watching. It wasn't particularly inviting. One leg was lower than the others, and a thin patch of moss had claimed the seat like a sleepy cat refusing to move. But it was dryish, which gave it top marks in my book. I sat down with a soft squish, my coat sighing against the damp stone, and leaned back to examine what view the bench offered. It faced a wall, not a remarkable wall either, just smooth stone, a bit discolored from rain and time, with a few cracks spidering toward the base. Someone had once tried to plant a vine nearby, judging by the single curling tendril reaching out from a crumbled pot. It looked like it had given up long ago. I couldn't help but chuckle. Of all the benches in the Taj Mahal complex, some facing majestic arches, others the iconic central dome, I'd found the one with a view of absolutely nothing. It was perfect. A few visitors passed by behind me, their footsteps echoing softly on the wet pathway. Some carried umbrellas like battle flags. Others wore those translucent plastic ponchos that flap around your ankles when you walk too fast. One couple took turns holding a bright orange towel over each other's heads as they posed near a garden archway, trying in vain to look romantic while soaked to the elbows. I watched them all through the corner of my eye, content to remain unnoticed. This bench had declared itself a secret, and I wasn't going to argue with that. I fished around in my pocket and found half of a hard candy, a caramel, I think. Its wrapper was wrinkled and a little torn, but the candy inside looked intact. I popped it into my mouth and let the sugar melt slowly as I listened to the rain's light tap, tap, tap on the leaves above. That's when I noticed the ant. Just one, wandering across the moss beside me like it had somewhere to be. It paused when it reached a tiny crack, turned in a little circle, and then continued on, determined but unhurried. I followed its path with great interest for several long minutes. It disappeared under the bench and never came back. Or maybe it did, and I just didn't recognize it. That's the thing about ants. You think you're watching just one, but it could be a whole rotation. Like understudies in a play you didn't know had a schedule. I finished my candy, careful not to bite down. Some things are better slow. A soft breeze passed through, rustling the hedge beside me. It smelled faintly of jasmine and wet earth. Somewhere nearby, someone sneezed. Once, loudly. Then silence again. I closed my eyes and leaned my head back against the wall. There was a small bump behind my ear, possibly an old carving or a rogue bit of moss. But I didn't move. The discomfort was small and oddly grounding. I stayed like that for a while, listening, not thinking, just being, just benching. After a long while on the wall-facing bench, my knees decided they'd had enough. I stretched with a little creak, like an old wooden gate, and wandered toward the southern garden paths. That part of the complex was quieter. Fewer tourists, more birds. Or maybe just quieter birds. That's where I met him. He stood beneath a pop-up awning made from stitched-together bits of canvas and rope, the kind that flaps and groans with every breeze. His stall was small, a cart, really, and tucked neatly between two well-trimmed shrubs as though it had grown there. A rusted sign leaned against one wheel, hand-painted in slanted English. Umbrellas for rain or sun or whatever. The display was minimal. 2 umbrellas leaned open beside the cart. One was navy blue with white flowers that looked vaguely like potatoes. The other was plain gray, bent slightly in the middle like it had been through a disagreement with the wind and hadn't fully recovered. Behind the cart stood a man with a thick mustache and an expression of infinite patience. He was leaning back in a wooden chair that was missing its front left leg. Rather than fixing it, he had balanced that corner on a rock, giving the chair a lopsided dignity. He nodded at me when I approached. Didn't speak, just nodded. I returned the nod and stood beside the umbrellas, waiting. The silence stretched. After nearly a minute, I asked, "Are they for sale?" He blinked slowly, then looked at the umbrellas as if seeing them for the first time. "Oh," he said. "Yes." Another pause. "They're nice," I offered. He considered this. "One of them leaks." I nodded slowly. "Which one?" He shrugged. "I forget." I crouched to inspect them. The navy one had a bent spoke. The gray one had a faded handle. Neither inspired confidence. "I don't really need one," I said. "Most people don't," he replied, and I felt that in my bones. I smiled. "Do you sell anything else?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a tiny notebook. He flipped through several blank pages, stopped somewhere in the middle, then closed it without writing anything. "Sometimes," he said, tucking it away again. I liked him. He didn't offer a pitch or a price. He didn't even seem entirely sure why he was there, but he was there, rain or shine, with his 2 ambiguous umbrellas and his uncertain business model. I stayed under his awning for a few minutes, enjoying the cover. The rain had picked up again. A soft tapping on canvas, like fingertips drumming on a countertop. The kind of rain that made you appreciate dry socks, even if you didn't have any. When I finally stepped away, he nodded once more. I nodded back. We had done the whole dance, I think, and not a single sale was made. Perfect. It wasn't far from the umbrella stand, just a little farther down a winding stone path lined with low flowering shrubs, when I came across the tea house, or at least what had once been a tea house. There was a wooden sign, barely hanging from one hinge, with the faint outline of a teacup carved into it. No words, just the shape. That alone was enough to guide a sleepy wanderer like me straight to its doorstep. The building was small and square, with delicate lattice windows and a faded red door that looked like it hadn't been opened in quite some time. It wasn't locked exactly, just stuck, like the air around it had grown thick with stillness. I didn't push. It didn't feel right to. Instead, I peered through one of the dusty windows. The inside was dark, but not empty. There were wooden chairs arranged in a loose semicircle around a low table, and on the table sat a teapot, right in the center, like it had been waiting for someone to come back. The cups were still there too. 6 of them, each turned upside down, collecting dust instead of tea. The strangest part? There was no dust on the table, just the cups. I tilted my head. Maybe someone came here still, someone who cleaned the surface but left the cups alone like little markers of some invisible gathering. Or maybe the cups were always upside down. Maybe that was their way of saying closed. I imagined the last day it was open. The murmur of quiet conversation, the gentle clink of porcelain, someone laughing softly at something only mildly funny, a bell on the door jingling now and then, the faint smell of cardamom and rose petals drifting through the windows. A tea house like that doesn't close loudly. It fades. Just like the rain had started to do again. A soft retreat, as if the sky had grown tired of crying. I sat on the low stone step out front. The door behind me remained stubbornly closed, but I didn't mind. The step was dry enough and offered a view of the garden just beginning to shimmer again under the parting clouds. A stray cat appeared from behind a shrub, gave me a quick glance, and sauntered up to the door like it owned the place. It sniffed the frame, pawed once at the edge, then turned a full circle and sat beside me like we were old friends waiting for the same appointment. We didn't talk, of course not, but we understood each other. I reached into my pocket and found a second piece of candy, a little ginger lozenge I didn't remember packing. I unwrapped it quietly and let the spicy warmth spread through my mouth as the clouds thinned and the light returned. The cat eventually left. No farewell. No acknowledgement. Just gone. Like a dream that fades the moment you try to hold it. I stayed a while longer. I wasn't in a hurry. By then, the rain had mostly stopped. The stones beneath my feet were slick but steaming gently in the sunshine, and the leaves above held tight to the last few drops, like they weren't quite ready to let them go. I took the long path through a quieter section of the garden, one lined with little stone markers and carved nooks tucked into the wall. That's where I saw him, a man holding a string. At first, I thought he was flying a kite. His arm was raised, fingers gently clutching the taut line, and he seemed to be looking upward. But as I drew closer, I realized the string didn't go up. It went sideways, across the walkway, over a bush, and then through the metal slats of a narrow gate on the opposite side. I followed the line with my eyes until it disappeared behind the hedges. He didn't move as I approached, just kept holding the string like it was something precious. I stood beside him without speaking. After a moment, he said, "It's not a trap." I raised an eyebrow. "The string," he clarified. "People always think it's a trap, or a trick, or a performance." I looked down at it again. "Then what is it?" He turned and looked at me with the kind of expression people wear when explaining a dream. "It's just something I'm holding on to." I nodded. That made as much sense as anything else. "Sometimes," he continued, "it tugs back." There was a pause. "Does it pull hard?" He smiled. "Number, just enough to know it's still there." We stood there for a while, not watching the string, but somehow aware of it the whole time. Its quiet tension stretching through the air like a memory between two people who no longer speak. I never saw what was on the other end. Eventually, he lowered his hand and the line drooped slightly. He wound it slowly around a small wooden spool like he'd done it 1,000 times before. Then he nodded to me and walked off in the opposite direction, holding the spool gently in his palm like it might whisper something if he squeezed too tightly. The line never went slack. It just vanished into the distance. I didn't follow it. I turned instead toward a low marble bench under a flowering tree and sat down, suddenly aware of the hum in my pocket. The stone. But not yet. Not quite. I leaned back, looked up at the leaves still dripping overhead, and let the breeze carry whatever story that string had belonged to somewhere far away. There was a fountain just beyond the flowering trees, round with a scalloped edge and a stone pedestal in the middle that looked like it once held a bowl or maybe a sculpture. But today, it held only silence. No water spilled, no bubbling sound. Just the faint scent of mineral-rich stone and the feeling that something had once happened there and now simply didn't. I sat on the wide edge of the fountain and ran my fingers along its rim. It was smooth, worn down by time and touch. Little bits of moss clung to the base like shy guests overstaying their welcome. I leaned forward and looked into the shallow basin. No coins, no leaves. Just a few stray petals from the nearby tree, pinkish and folded in on themselves like they were trying not to be noticed. There's something about a dry fountain. It doesn't try to impress you. It just sits. Waiting, maybe. Or resting. I stayed with it. In the distance, a gardener pushed a wheelbarrow filled with neatly trimmed branches. He didn't see me, or if he did, he didn't let on. His movements were deliberate, slow but sure, like someone whose whole job was to keep things quiet and alive. I reached into my coat and pulled out a small notebook. Not to write anything, but just to hold. The cover was worn and the pages inside were mostly blank, except for a few lines I'd scribbled down in other times and other places. One page read, "Stone smells like rain if you wait long enough." Another, "Don't chase ducks unless they chase you first." And curiously, Cairo, 1892. The bread was better than expected. That one made me smile. I flipped to the back page and tapped it thoughtfully with my pencil. I didn't write anything. Not today. Today wasn't for remembering. It was for letting things be forgotten in peace. The breeze shifted. One of the petals in the fountain twitched, slid an inch, and settled again. That was the only movement, but it was enough to feel like the world was still turning, even here, beside a fountain that had forgotten how to sing. I sat until my legs fell asleep, and then I stayed a little longer, because sometimes that's all a place wants, for someone to sit and not ask anything of it. The sun had begun its slow descent behind the clouds, casting a warm, diffused light across the marble paths. Not golden exactly, more like the pale orange of milky tea left too long in the cup. The Taj Mahal, always dignified, now looked almost shy in the fading day, like it had told its story too many times and was content to let the evening speak instead. I wandered back toward the reflecting pool one last time. The puddles had shrunk into silver blotches. The mist had thinned to a fine breath. The scent of wet stone was fading, replaced by the dry memory of dust and flowers. It was then, with no warning, that I felt the hum. The stone, nestled deep in my coat pocket, began to vibrate gently against my side. Not loudly, not insistently, just enough to say, "It's time." I reached for it, cupping it in my palm like I always did, letting its quiet glow light up the creases in my fingers. It pulsed softly, like the heartbeat of something old and patient. I looked back over the gardens, the paths, the benches, the soggy map man, the upside-down teacups, the string, the petal in the fountain, the cat, the spoon. And then I looked up at the Taj Mahal. Still, silent, rain-washed and waiting for someone else to notice it in the exact way I had. I smiled. I'll miss this, I said to no one. The stone pulsed again, and everything began to shift. Colors dissolved first, blues into grays, greens into whispers of memory, then the sounds like someone slowly turning down the volume on a dream. The warmth in my hand brightened until it was the only thing I could feel. I didn't resist. I never do. Wherever I'm going next, I hope it's uneventful. Quiet, a little damp, maybe somewhere with a dry place to sit and something small to watch. And maybe, if the wind is just right, I'll find another spoon. Until next time.